go last. Okay, let me kind of introduce a little bit and then we'll start. Well, thank you for coming tonight. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the library's first story time for grown-ups, and I'm very excited about this. We have 4 people that are versed in theater and in telling stories, and so they are going to tell you some thrilling tales tonight, and I hope you enjoy it. Sit back and relax and have some treats if you like. We're starting off with Colin Van Weston, and he'll be reading the poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee.
Hello, thank you all for coming. So this is a poem that I became familiar with in high school. I think it's a pretty famous poem. It's by Robert Service, who is a Canadian poet. And so I think it'll kind of fit the theme tonight of something that's a bit spooky. So. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake Labarge. I cremated Sam McGee. Now, Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the South to roam around the poles, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, though he'd often say in his homely way that he'd sooner live in hell. On a Christmas day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson's Trail. Talk of your cold through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we'd close, then our lashes froze, till sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night, as we laid packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed, and the stars overhead were dancing, heel to toe, he turned to me and, "Cap," says he, "I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking that you won't refuse my last request." Well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no. And then he said with a sort of moan, "It's the cursed cold. It's got right hold till I'm chilled clean through the bone. Yet, 'tain't being dead. It's my awful dread of an icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear that, foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains." A pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail. We started out on the streak of dawn, but God, he looked ghastly pale. He crouched on the sleigh and raved all day of his home in Tennessee, and before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. There wasn't a breath in that land of death, and we hurried horror-driven, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, "You may tax your brawn and brains, but you promised true, and it's up to you to cremate those last remains." Now, A promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, in my heart, how I cursed that load. In the long, long night, by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows. Oh God, how I loathed the thing. And every day that quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grow. And on I went, though the grub was spent, though the dogs were spent and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad and I felt half mad. But I swore I would not give in. And I'd often sing to that hateful thing and hearken it with a grin. Till I came to the marge of Lake Labarge, and a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, but I saw it in thrice. It was called the Alice May, and I looked a bit, and I thought a bit, and I looked back at my frozen chum. And then, "Here," I said with a sudden cry, "is my crematorium." I tore some planks from the cabin floor and I lit the boiler fire. I found some coal that was lying around and I heaped the fuel higher. Flames just soared and the furnace roared, such a blaze you seldom see. Then I burrowed a hole in that glowing coal and I stuffed in Sam McGee. Then I made a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so. And the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the heat sweat rolled down my face, and I don't know why. And the greasy smoke in an inky cloak went streaking down the sky. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out and they danced about her again. I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, "I'll just take a peep inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked." Then the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar. He wore a smile that you could see for a mile and said, "Please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear that you'll let in the cold and the storm. Since I left Plum Tree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm." There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake Labarge. I cremated Sam McGee.
All right, now, guys, we have Kala Klinker with The Adventure of the German Student by Washington Irving.
For 25 years, I taught at a hospital school, Greenville Springs State Hospital School in Greenville Springs, Louisiana. I had students ages 12 to 17, and as the English teacher, I tried to give them a selection of things to read, and we always had a unit on Washington Irving. And of course, SET just recently did The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, where Colin played Ichabod Crane, and Jay was also involved playing 2 or 3 different roles. But my students liked the ghost stories the best. And Washington Irving was a collector of ghost stories, and this is one of his best. The Adventure of the German Student. On a stormy night in the tempestuous times of the French Revolution, a young German was returning to his lodging at a late hour across the old part of Paris. The lightning gleamed, and the loud claps of thunder rattled through the lofty, narrow streets. But I should first tell you something about this young German. Gottfried Wolfgang was a young man of a good family. He had studied for some time at Göttingen, but being of a visionary and enthusiastic character, he had wandered into those wild and speculative doctrines which have so often bewildered German students. His secluded life, his intense application, and the singular nature of his studies had an effect on both mind and body. His health was impaired, his imagination diseased. He had been indulging in fanciful speculation on spiritual essences until, like Swedenborg, he had an ideal world of his own around him. He took up a notion, I do not know from what cause, that there was an evil influence hanging over him, an evil genius or spirit seeking to ensnare him and ensure his perdition. Such an idea, working on his melancholy temperament, produced the most gloomy effects. He became haggard and desponding. His friends discovered the mental malady preying upon him and determined that the best cure was a change of scene. He was sent, therefore, to finish his studies amidst the splendor and gaieties of Paris. Wolfgang arrived at Paris at the breaking out of the Revolution. The popular delirium at first caught his enthusiastic mind, and he was captivated by the political and philosophical theories of the day. But the scenes of blood which flowed shocked his sensitive nature, disgusted him with society and the world, and made him more than ever a recluse. He shut himself up in a solitary apartment in the Pays Latin, the quarter of students. There, in the gloomy street, not far from the monastic walls of the Sorbonne, he pursued his favorite speculations. Sometimes he spent hours together in the great libraries of Paris, those catacombs of departed authors, rummaging among their hordes of dusty and obsolete works in quest of food for his unhealthy appetite. He was, in a manner, a literary ghoul, feeding on the charnel house of decayed literature. Wolfgang, although solitary and recluse, was of an ardent temperament, but for a time it operated merely upon his imagination. He was too shy and ignorant of the world to make any advances to the fair, but he was a passionate admirer of female beauty, and in his lonely chamber would often lose himself in reveries on forms and faces which he had seen, and his fancy would deck out images of loveliness far surpassing the reality. While his mind was in this excited and sublimated state, a dream produced an extraordinary effect upon him. It was of a female face of transcendent beauty. So strong was the impression made that he dreamt of it again and again. It haunted his thoughts by day, his slumbers by night. He became passionately enamored of this shadow of a dream. This lasted so long that it became one of those fixed ideas which haunt the minds of the melancholy man and are at times mistaken for madness. Such was Gottfried Wolfgang, and such his situation at the time I mentioned. He was returning home late one stormy night through some of the old and gloomy streets of the Marais, the ancient part of Paris. The loud claps of thunder rattled among the high houses of the narrow streets. He came to the Place de Grève, the square where public executions were performed. The lightning quivered about the pinnacles of the ancient Hôtel de Ville and shed flickering gleams over the open space in front. As Wolfgang was crossing the square, he shrank back in horror at finding himself close by the guillotine. It was the height of the Reign of Terror, when this dreadful instrument of death stood ever ready, and its scaffold was continually running with the blood of the virtuous and the brave. It had that very day been actively employed in the work of carnage, and there it stood in grim array amidst a silent and sleeping city, waiting for fresh victims. Wolfgang's heart sickened within him. And he was shuddering from the horrible engine when he beheld a shadowy form cowering, as it were, at the foot of the steps which led up to the scaffold. A succession of vivid flashes of lightning revealed it more distinctly. It was a female figure dressed in black. She was seated on one of the lower steps of the scaffold, leaning forward, her face hid in her lap, and her long, disheveled tresses hanging to the ground, streaming with the rain which fell in torrents. Wolfgang paused. There was something awful in this solitary moment of woe. The female had the appearance of being above the common order. He knew the times to be full of vicissitude, and that many a fair head which had once been pillowed on down now wandered houseless. Perhaps this was some poor mourner whom the dreadful axe had rendered desolate, and who sat here heartbroken on the strand of existence from which all that was dear to her had been launched into eternity. He approached and addressed the accents of sympathy. She raised her head and gazed wildly at him. What was his astonishment at beholding, by the bright glare of the lightning, the very face which had haunted him in his dreams. It was pale and disconsolate, but ravishingly beautiful. Trembling with violent and conflicting emotions, Wolfgang again accosted her. He spoke something of her being exposed at such an hour of the night, and to the fury of such a storm, and offered to conduct her to her friends. She pointed to the guillotine with a gesture of dreadful significance. "I have no friend on earth," she said. "But you have a home," said Wolfgang. "Yes, in the grave." The heart of the student melted at the words. "If a stranger dare make an offer," said he, "without danger of being misunderstood, I would offer my humble dwelling as a shelter, myself as a devoted friend. I am friendless myself in Paris and a stranger to the land, but if my life could be of service, it is at your disposal, and should be sacrificed before harm or indignity should come to you." There was an honest earnestness in the young man's manner that had its effect. His foreign accent, too, was in his favor. It showed him not to be a hackneyed inhabitant of Paris. Indeed, there is an eloquence in true enthusiasm that is not to be doubted. The homeless stranger confided herself implicitly to the protection of the student. He supported her faltering steps across the Pont Neuf, and by the place where the statue of Henry IV had been overthrown by the populace. The storm had abated, and the thunder rumbled at a distance. All Paris was quiet. That great volcano of human passion slumbered for a while to gather fresh strength for the next day's eruption. The student conducted his charge through the ancient streets of the Pays Latine and by the dusky walls of the Sorbonne to the great dingy hotel which he inhabited. The old portress who admitted them stared with surprise at the unusual sight of the melancholy Wolfgang with his female companion. On entering his apartment, the student was, for the first time, blushed at the scantiness and indifference of his dwelling. He had but one chamber, an old-fashioned saloon, heavily carved and fantastically furnished with the remains of former magnificence, for it was one of those hotels in the quarter of the Luxembourg Palace, which had once belonged to nobility. It was lumbered with books and papers and all the usual apparatus of a student, and his bed stood in a recess at one end. When the lights were brought and Wolfgang had a better opportunity of contemplating the stranger, he was more than ever intoxicated by her beauty. Her face was pale, but of a dazzling fairness, set off by a profusion of raven hair that hung clustering about it. Her eyes were large, brilliant, with singular expression approaching almost to wildness. As far as her black dress permitted her shape to be seen, it was of perfect symmetry. Her whole appearance was highly striking, though she was dressed in the simplest style. The only thing approaching to an ornament which she wore was a broad black band around her neck, clasped by diamonds. The perplexity now commenced with the student how to dispose of the helpless being thus thrown upon his protection. He thought of abandoning his chamber to her and seeking shelter for himself elsewhere. Still, he was so fascinated by her charms, there seemed too much to be such a spell upon his thoughts and senses that he could not tear himself from her presence. Her manner, too, was singular and unaccountable. She spoke no more of the guillotine. Her grief had abated. The attentions of the student had first won her confidence and then apparently her heart. She was evidently an enthusiast like himself, and enthusiasts soon understand one another. In the infatuation of the moment, Wolfgang avowed his passion for her. He told her the story of his mysterious dream and how she had possessed his heart before he had even seen her. She was strangely affected by his recital and acknowledged to have felt an impulse toward him equally unacknowledged, to have felt it was unaccountable. It was the time for wild theory and wild actions. Old prejudices and superstitions were done away. Everything was under the sway of the goddess of reason. Among other rubbish of the old times, the forms and ceremonies of marriage began to be considered superfluous bonds for honorable minds. Social compacts were the vogue, Wolfgang was too much of a theorist not to be tainted by the liberal doctrines of his day. "Why should we separate?" said he. "Our hearts are united in the eye of reason and honor. We are one. What need is there of sordid forms to bind high souls together?" The stranger listened with emotion. She had evidently received illuminations at the same school. "You have no home nor family," continued he. "Let me be everything to you, or rather let us be everything to one another. If form is necessary, form shall be observed. There is my hand. I pledge myself to you forever." "Forever?" said the stranger solemnly. "Forever," repeated Wolfgang. The stranger clasped the hand extended to her. "Then I am yours," murmured she, and sank upon his bosom. The next morning the student left his bride sleeping and sallied forth at an early hour to seek more spacious apartments suitable to the change in his situation. When he returned, he found the stranger lying with her head hanging over the bed and one arm thrown over it. He spoke to her, but received no reply. He advanced to awaken her from her uneasy posture. On taking her hand, it was cold. There was no pulsation. Her face was pallid and ghastly. In a word, she was a corpse. Horrified and frantic, he alarmed the house. A scene of confusion ensued. The police was summoned. As the officer of police entered the room, he started back on beholding the corpse. "Great heavens!" cried he. "How did this woman come here?" "Do you know anything about her?" said Wolfgang eagerly. "Do I?" explained the police officer. "She was guillotined yesterday." He stepped forward, undid the black collar around the neck of the corpse, and the head rolled on the floor. The student burst into a frenzy. "The fiend! The fiend has gained possession of me!" shrieked he. "I am lost forever!" They tried to soothe him, but in vain. He was possessed with the frightful belief that an evil spirit had reanimated the dead body to ensnare him. He went distracted and died in a madhouse. When I was teaching at the school in Louisiana, at Greenwell Springs Hospital School, I was following a curriculum that, where you had short stories, and Washington Irving always comes up in American literature. He's the father of American literature. So I was very familiar with the stories that Washington Irving produced, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, The Adventure of the German Student, and all these other stories. And when I was approached, I said, "Well, I know a great ghost story to tell. Washington Irving's The Adventure of the German Student." And so I found a copy of it and started work on interpreting it and making it a little spooky in spots and a little exciting in other spots. And so since the SET just got done doing The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, I thought, well, this is kind of a nice follow-up to this, and there are many other Washington Irving stories. He wrote a lot of them, so it was fun to do a ghost story. You have to have a love of literature first. I'm a voracious reader. I'm always reading something. I love novels, and I can read through a novel in a couple of days. I love short stories. I think if you want to do something, one of the best places to start is with short stories. Find an author that you like and just try reading it out loud. We start when we are children. I can remember my mother reading me stories, and I would memorize them, and my mother said I used to be able to turn the page at the right time, even before I went to school and learned how to read. I had that memory in my head of the story, the structure of the story. We like a beginning, a middle, and an end. We want the story to come out. So if you're interested in doing that, there are classes available through the colleges that are in our area. They all have classes in oral interpretation of literature. So maybe we need to start a list of people who want to learn and get a class going on of how to take a story, break it down, how you create a voice for the characters in the story. Sometimes you have to leave massive pieces of the story out to get to the oral part of the story that everybody wants to hear. My background is in theater. I graduated, Nancy Den Hartog and I were the first two theater graduates from Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa, way back in 1968. So I've taught at Ellsworth Community College in Iowa Falls, at East Tennessee State University in Kingsport, Johnson City, Tennessee, at LSU, and then for 25 years I worked for the state of Louisiana at a hospital school where I taught English language arts and whatever else. Sometimes I'd have a student come in and needed a speech teacher, but that's where I actually started taking stories and turning them into readers' theaters so my students could participate in it. And I have my doctorate is a theater generalist, so one of my areas, a major area, was oral interpretation. And I've been involved in that since I was in high school. I was in choral readers at Orange City, and I've just kept doing this kind of thing, just reading and interpreting. And so when I was asked to do this, sure, why not? This is right up my alley. Okay. And the storytelling goes way back. It's a primitive thing. We know that cave dwellers sat around the campfires or in the caves and told stories. And there was sometimes singing and dancing, and even the Scandinavians, the Vikings, and the longhouses where they would tell these tales, and this is continued on through human history. We like to get together and sit around and tell stories. Just go to a family reunion and hear, everybody starts telling stories. It's part of who we are. We have always been storytellers, and it's just a function that keeps us going. And I found it, especially with the students that I was working with in a hospital school, they had a chance to act appropriately, and they loved taking on these characters and acting them out. So they were acting well instead of acting badly. They were doing things in an appropriate way, and they really enjoyed doing it, and it was good for them. And when I couldn't find a story that had been turned into a reader's theater, I just sit down and do it myself, and I still do it even today. So it's part of who I am, basically. Thank you for everyone who came out tonight and for the other readers. I have adopted Jay and Colin. They are my nephews. So I've worked with both of them at the Little Theater, and hopefully we will get to do this again with other kinds of stories. So the library may be the place to go if you want to listen to a good story.
All right, next we have Jay Oldenkamp with Lamb to Slaughter by Roald Dahl.
I was, was first introduced to this story in high school, and I found it dreadfully delightful. Lamb to the Slaughter was originally published in September of 1953 in the Harper's Magazine. It's written by Roald Dahl. The room was warm and clean, the curtains drawn, the 2 table lamps alight, hers and one by the empty chair opposite. On the sideboard behind her, 2 tall glasses, soda water, whiskey, fresh ice cubes in a thermos bucket. Mary Maloney was waiting for her husband to come home from work. Now and again, she would glance up at the clock, but without anxiety, merely to please herself with the thought that each minute gone by made it nearer the time when he would come. There was a slow, smiling air about her, and about everything she did. The drop of a head as she bent over her sewing was curiously tranquil, and her skin, for this was her 6th month with child, had acquired a wonderful translucent quality. The mouth was soft, and the eyes, with their new placid look, seemed larger and darker than before. When a clock said 10 minutes to 5, she began to listen. And a few moments later, punctually as always, she heard the tires on the gravel outside and a car door slamming, the footsteps passing the window, the key turning in the lock. She laid aside her sewing, stood up, and went forward to kiss him as he came in. "Hello, darling," she answered. "Hello, darling," he answered. She took his coat and hung it in the closet. Then she walked over and made the drinks, a strongish one for him, a weak one for herself, and soon she was back again in her chair with the sewing, and he in the other, opposite, holding the tall glass in both hands, rocking it so the ice cubes tinkled against the side. For her, this was always a blissful time of day. She knew he didn't want to speak much until the first drink was finished, and she, on her side, was content to sit quietly, enjoying his company after long hours alone in the house. She loved to luxuriate in the presence of this man, and to feel the almost as a sunbather feels the sun, that warm male glow that came out of him to her when they were alone together. She loved him for the way he sat loosely in a chair, for the way he came in a door, or moved slowly across the room with long strides. She loved intent, far look in his eyes when they rested in her, the funny shape of the mouth, and especially the way he remained silent about his tiredness, sitting still with himself until the whiskey had taken some of it away. "Tired, darling?" "Yes," he said, "I'm tired." As he spoke, he did an unusual thing. He lifted his glass and drained it with one swallow, although there was still half of it, at least half of it left. She wasn't really watching him, but she knew what he had done because she heard the ice cubes falling back against the bottom of the empty glass when he lowered his arm. He paused a moment, leaning forward in the chair. Then he got up and went slowly over to fetch himself another. "I'll get it," she cried, jumping up. "Sit down," he said. When he came back, she noticed that the new drink was a dark amber with a quantity of whiskey in it. "Darling, shall I get your slippers?" "No." She watched him as he began to sip the dark yellow drink, and she could see only little oily swirls in the liquid because it was so strong. "I think it's a shame," she said, "that when a policeman gets to be as senior as you, they keep him walking about on feet all day long." He didn't answer, so she bent her head again and went on with her sewing. But each time he lifted the drink to his lips, she heard the ice cubes clinking against the side of his glass. "Darling," she said, "would you like me to get you some cheese? I haven't made any supper because it's Thursday." "No," he said. "If you're too tired to eat out," she went on, "it's still not too late. There's plenty of meat and there's stuff in the freezer, and you can have it right here and not even move out of the chair." Her eyes waited on him for an answer, a smile, a little nod, but he made no sign. "Anyway," she went on, "I'll get you some cheese and crackers first." "I don't want it," he said. She moved uneasily in her chair, the large eyes still watching his face. "But you must eat. I'll fix it anyway, and then you can have it or not, as you like." She stood up and placed her sewing on a table by the lamp. "Sit down," he said. "Just for a minute, sit down." It wasn't till then that she began to get frightened. "Go on," he said. "Sit down." She lowered herself back slowly into the chair, watching him all the time with those large, bewildered eyes. He had finished a second drink and was staring down into the glass, frowning. "Listen," he said. "I've got something to tell you." "What is it, darling? What's the matter?" He had now become absolutely motionless, and he kept his head down so that the light from the lamp beside him fell across the upper part of his face, leaving the chin and mouth in shadow. She noticed there was a little muscle moving near the corner of his left eye. "This is going to be a bit of a shock to you, I'm afraid," he said. "But I've thought about it a good deal, and I haven't decided that the only thing to do is tell you right away. I hope you won't blame me too much." And he told her. It didn't take long, 4 or 5 minutes at most, and she sat very still through it all, watching him with a kind of dazed horror as he went further and further away from her with each word. "So there it is," he added. "And I know it's kind of a bad time to be telling you, but there simply wasn't any way. Of course, I'll give you money and see you're looked after, but there needn't really be any fuss. I hope not, anyway. It wouldn't be very good for my job." Her first instinct was not to believe any of it, to reject it all. It occurred to her that perhaps he hadn't even spoken, that she herself had imagined the whole thing. Maybe, if she went about her business and acted as though she hadn't been listening, then later, when she sort of woke up again, she might find that none of it had ever happened. "I'll get supper," she managed to whisper, and this time he didn't stop her. When she walked across the room, she couldn't feel her feet touching the floor. She couldn't feel anything at all, except the slight nausea and a desire to vomit. Everything was automatic now. Down the steps to the cellar, the light switch, the deep freeze, the hand inside the cabinet taking hold of the first object it met. She lifted it out and looked at it. It was wrapped in paper, so she took off the paper and looked at it again. A leg of lamb. All right then, they would have lamb for supper. She carried it upstairs, holding the thin bone end of it with both her hands, and she went through the living room. She saw him standing over by the window with his back to her, and she stopped. "For God's sake," he said, hearing her but not turning around, "don't make some for me. I'm going out." At that point, Mary Maloney simply walked up behind him, and without any pause, she swung the big frozen leg of lamb high in the air and brought it down as hard as she could on the back of his head. She might just as well have hit him with a steel club. She stepped back a pace, waiting, and the funny thing was that he remained standing there for at least 4 or 5 seconds, gently swaying. Then he crashed to the carpet. The violence of the crash, the noise, the small table overturning helped bring her out of the shock. She came out slowly, feeling cold and surprised. And she stood for a while blinking at the body, still holding a ridiculous piece of meat tight with both hands. "All right," she told herself. "So, I've killed him." It was extraordinary. Now, how clear her mind became all of a sudden. She began thinking very fast. As a wife of a detective, she knew quite well what the penalty would be. That was fine. It made no difference to her. In fact, it would be a relief. On the other hand, what about the child? What were the laws about murderers of unborn children? Did they kill then both mother and child? Or did they wait until the 10th month? What did they do? Mary Maloney didn't know, and she certainly wasn't prepared to take a chance. She carried the meat into the kitchen, placed it in a pan, turned the oven on high, and shoved it inside. Then she washed her hands and ran upstairs to the bedroom. She sat down before the mirror, tidied her hair, touched up her lips and face. She tried a smile. It came out rather peculiar. She tried again. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly aloud. The voice sounded peculiar too. "I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, and I think a can of peas." That was better. Both the smile and the voice were coming out better now. She rehearsed it several times more. Then she ran downstairs, took her coat, went out the back door, and down the garden to the street. It wasn't 6 o'clock yet, and the lights were still in the grocery shop. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly, smiling at the man behind the counter. "Why, good evening, Mrs. Maloney. How are you?" "I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, and I think a can of peas." The man turned and reached up behind him on a shelf for peas. "Patrick's decided he's tired and doesn't want to eat out tonight," she told him. "We usually go out Thursdays, you know, and now he's caught me without any vegetables in the house." "Then how about meat, Mrs. Maloney?" "No, I've got meat, thanks. I've got a nice leg of lamb for the freezer. Oh, well, I don't know much like cooking it frozen, Sam, but I'm taking a chance on it this time. You think it's all right? Personally, the grocer said, I don't believe it makes any difference. You want these Idaho potatoes? Oh, yes, that'll be fine. 2 of these. Anything else? The grocer cocked his head on the side, looking at her pleasantly. How about afterwards? What are you going to give him before afterwards? Well, what would you suggest, Sam? The man glanced around his shop. How about a big slice of cheesecake? I know he likes that. Perfect, she said. He loves it. And when it was all wrapped and she had it paid, she put on her brightest smile and said, Thank you, Sam. Good night. Good night, Mrs. Maloney, and thank you. And now, she told herself as she hurried back, all she was doing now was returning home to her husband, and he was waiting for his supper. And she must cook it good, and make it as tasty as possible because the poor man was tired. And if, when she entered the house, she happened to find anything unusual, or tragic, or terrible, then naturally it'd be a shock, and she'd become frantic of grief and horror. Mind you, she wasn't expecting to find anything. She was just going home with vegetables. Mrs. Patrick Maloney going home with vegetables on Thursday evening to cook supper for her husband. That's the way she told herself to do everything right and natural. Keep things absolutely natural, and there'll be no need for any acting at all. Therefore, when she entered the kitchen by the back door, she was humming a little tune to herself and smiling. Patrick, she called, how are you, darling? She put the parcel down on the table and went through into the living room. And when she saw him lying there on the floor with his legs doubled up and one arm twisted back underneath his body, it was really rather a shock. All the old love and longing for him welled up inside her, and she ran over to him, knelt down beside him, and began to cry her heart out. It was easy. No acting was necessary. A few minutes later, she got up and went to the phone. She knew the number of the police station, and when the man at the other end answered, she cried to him, Quick! Come quick! Patrick's dead! Who's speaking? Mrs. Maloney! Mrs. Patrick Maloney! You mean Patrick Maloney's dead? I think so, she sobbed. He's lying on the floor and I think he's dead. Be right over, the man said. The car came very quickly, and when she opened the front door, 2 policemen walked in. She knew them both nearly all the men at the precinct, and she fell right into a chair. Then went over to join the other one, who was called O'Malley, kneeling by the body. Is he dead? She cried. I'm afraid he is. What happened? Briefly, she told her story about going out to the grocery and coming back to find him on the floor. When she was crying, Noonan discovered a small patch of congealed blood on a dead man's head. He showed it to O'Malley, who got up at once and hurried to the phone. Soon, other men began to come into the house. First, a doctor, then 2 detectives, one of whom she knew by name. Later, a police photographer arrived and took pictures, and a man who knew about fingerprints. There was a great deal of whispering and muttering beside the corpse, and the detectives kept asking her a lot of questions. But they always treated her kindly. She told her story again, this time right from the beginning. When Patrick had come in, she was sewing, and he was tired. So tired, he hadn't wanted to go out for supper. She told how she'd put the meat in the oven. It's there now, cooking. And she stopped out to the grocer for vegetables, and came back to find him lying on the floor. Which grocer? One of the detectives asked. She told him, and he turned and whispered something to the other detective, who immediately went outside into the street. In 15 minutes, he was back with a page of notes, and there was more whispering, and through her sobbing, she heard a few whispered phrases. Acted quite normal. Very cheerful. Wanted to give him a good supper. Peas, cheesecake. Impossible, that's she. After a while, the photographer and the doctor departed, and the 2 other men came in and took the corpse away on a stretcher. Then the fingerprint men came in and went away. The 2 detectives remained, and so did the policemen. They were exceptionally nice to her, and Jack Newman asked if she would rather go somewhere else to her sister's house, perhaps, or to his own wife, who would take care of her and put her up for the night. No, she said. She didn't feel she could move even a yard at the moment. Would they mind awfully if she stayed just where she was until she felt better? She didn't feel too good at the moment. She really didn't. Then, hadn't she better lie down in the bed? Jack Noonan asked. No, she said. She'd like to stay right where she was, in this chair. A little later, perhaps, when she felt better, she would move. So they left her there while they went about their business, searching the house. Occasionally, one of the detectives asked her another question. Sometimes Jack Noonan spoke at her gently as he passed by. Her husband, he told her, had been killed by a blow on the back of the head, administered with a heavy, blunt instrument, almost certainly a large piece of metal. They were looking for a weapon. The murderer may have taken it with him, but on the other hand, he may have thrown it out, away, or hidden it somewhere on the premises. It's the old story, he said. Get the weapon, and you've got the man. Later, one of the detectives came up and sat beside her. Did she know, he asked, of anything in the house that could have been used as a weapon? Would she mind having a look around to see if anything was missing? A very big spanner, for example, or a heavy metal vase. They didn't have any heavy metal vases, she said. Or a big spanner? She didn't think they had a big spanner, but there might be some things like that in the garage. The search went on. She knew that there were other policemen in the garden all around the house. She could hear their footsteps on the gravel outside, and sometimes she saw a flash of the torch through a chink in the curtains. It began to get late, nearly 9, when she noticed by the clock on the mantel. The foreman searching the room seemed to be growing wary, a trifle exasperated. Jack, she said the next time Sergeant Noonan went by, would you mind giving me a drink? Sure, I'll give you a drink. You mean this whiskey? Yes, please. Just a small one, though. It might make me feel better. He handed her the glass. Why don't you have one yourself? She said. You must be awfully tired. Please do. You've been very good to me. Well, he answered, it's not strictly allowed, but I might just take a drop to keep me going. One by one, the others came in and were persuaded to take a little nip of whiskey. They stood around rather awkwardly with the drinks in their hands, uncomfortable in her presence, trying to say consoling things to her. Sergeant Noonan wandered into the kitchen, came out quickly and said, Look, Mr. Maloney, you know that oven of yours is still on, and the meat is still inside. Oh, dear me, she cried, so it is. I'd better turn it off for you, hadn't I? Will you do that, Jack? Thank you so much. When the sergeant returned a second time, she looked at him with large, dark, tearful eyes. Jack Noonan, she said. Yes? Would you do me a small favor? You and these others? We can try, Mrs. Maloney. Well, she said, here you all are, and good friends of dear Patrick's too, and helping to catch the man who killed him. You must be terribly hungry by now because it's long past your supper time, and I know Patrick would never forgive me. God bless his soul. If I allowed you to remain in his house while offering you decent hospitality, why don't you eat up that lamb that's in the oven? It'll be cooked just right by now. Wouldn't dream of it, Sergeant Noonan said. Please, she begged, please eat it. Personally, I couldn't touch a thing. Certainly not what's been in this house when he was here. But it's all right for you. It'd be a favor to me if you'd eat it up. Then you can go on with your work afterwards. There was a good deal of hesitation among the 4 policemen. But they were clearly hungry, and in the end they were persuaded to go into the kitchen and help themselves. The woman stayed where she was, listening to them, speaking among themselves. Their voices thick and sloppy because their mouths are full of meat. Having some more, Charlie? No, better not finish it. She wants us to finish it. She said no. Me doing her a favor. Okay, then, give me some more. That's hell of a big club that gun must have used to hit poor Patrick, one of them was saying. The doc says his skull was smashed all to pieces just like from a sledgehammer. That's why we ought to be easy to find him. Exactly what I say. Whoever done it, they're not going to be carrying a little thing like that around with them much longer than they need. One of them belched. Personally, I think it's right here on the premises. Probably right under our very noses. What do you think, Jack? And in the other room, Mrs. Maloney began to giggle. So actually, it was during one of SCT's shows during The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It was during rehearsal. Colin had a couple short stories like, "Oh, what you reading?" And he's like, "Oh, Robin's doing this like scary stories or whatnot for the library." I was like, "Oh, I think that'd be cool." And he had like Lamb of Slaughter, and then there was another one I can't remember. I was like, okay. I read Lamb of Slaughter in high school in a 9th or 10th grade English class. And again, I said I liked it. It was dreadfully delightful. It was really cool. And so I said, okay, I'll just read this one. And that's how I said it. I think that reading aloud, it brings a story to life. You gotta hear the voices. And things that are happening. Like Colin was mentioning earlier, like if there's pauses, like when you're just reading it in your mind, those just don't naturally occur. But when reading it out loud, there's those pauses, dramatic pauses, like, and then X, Y, Z things happen. And I think it's just important. Like, in the old days, stories were done orally, and it's just part of tradition. I didn't when I was a sophomore in high school. I did high school debate in Okoboji, and then later I did large group speech and then individual speech. I did a couple plays in high school with helping with background stuff. And later I didn't do much of anything else with theater related wise until a couple years ago when SCT did White Christmas. I went and did like karaoke with some friends, and they said, "Oh, you should go and try audition for White Christmas." I said, "Sure, whatever, like, fine, get me the information, I'll go do it." And then I got the part of Mike Nolte, and from there I was just hooked. It was fantastic, and I love doing stuff at SCT, and I'm in another show now, I guess. So thank you to the people who came out tonight. This was fun, and thank you to the viewers at home who weren't able to come out but are going to be able to watch it on TV.
So the parents are George and Lydia, and the children are Peter and Wendy, and David is a psychologist who comes in to help the family. I just say that because with 5 characters, I'm not doing 5 voices. Just telling you right now. So, and there's one character who is referenced in the story named Rima, and she is a heroine from an African story, like a jungle heroine. So just so when we come across that, you know, if you don't know the story, it confused me the first time I read it. So. So, the Veld. "George, I wish you'd look at the nursery." "What's wrong with it?" "I don't know." "Well then, I just want you to look at it, is all, or call a psychologist in to look at it." "What would a psychologist do with a nursery?" "You know very well what he'd want." His wife paused in the middle of the kitchen and watched the stove busy humming to itself, making supper for the 4. "It's just that the nursery is different now than it was." "All right, let's have a look." They walked down the hallway of their soundproofed Happy Life home, which had cost them $30,000 installed. This house, which clothed and fed and rocked them to sleep and played and sang and was good to them. Their approach sensitized a switch somewhere, and the nursery light flicked on when they came within 10 feet of it. Similarly, behind them, in the halls, lights went on and off as they left them behind with a softly and automatically. "Well," said George Hadley. They stood on the thatched floor of the nursery. It was 40 feet across by 40 feet long and 30 feet high. It had cost them half again as much as the rest of the house. "But nothing's too good for our children," George had said. The nursery was silent. It was empty as a jungle glade at high noon. The walls were blank and two-dimensional. Now, as George and Lydia Hadley stood in the center of the room, the walls began to purr and recede into the crystalline distance. It seemed
and presently an African veldt appeared, in 3 dimensions on all sides, in color reproduced to a final pebble and bit of straw. The ceiling above them became a deep sky with a hot yellow sun. George Hadley felt the perspiration start on his brow. "Let's get out of this, son," he said. "This is a little too real, but I don't see anything wrong with it." "Wait a moment, you'll see," said his wife. Now the hidden ordophonics were beginning to blow a wind of odor at the two in the middle of the baked veldt land. The hot straw smell of the lying grass, the cool green smell of the hidden water hole, the great rust smell of the animals, the smell of dust like a red paprika in the hot air, and now the sounds, the thud of distant antelope feet on grassy sod, the paper rustling of vultures. A shadow passed through a sky. The shadow flickered on George Hadley's upturned, sweating face. "Filthy creatures." "The vultures?" "You see there are lions far over there, that way. Now they're on their way to the watering hole. They must have been eating," said Lydia. "I don't know what." "Some animals." George Hadley put his hand up to shield from the burning light from his squinted eyes. "A zebra baby, or a giraffe, maybe." "Are you sure?" His wife sounded with a peculiar tone. "No, it's a little late to be sure," he said, amused. "Nothing over there I can see but clean bone, and the vulture's droppings on what's left." "Did you hear that scream?" she asked. "No." "About a minute ago." "Sorry. No." The lions were coming. And again, George Hadley was filled with admiration for the mechanical genius who had conceived this room. A miracle of efficiency, selling for an absurdly low price. Every home should have one. Oh, occasionally they frightened you with their clinical accuracy. They startled you, gave you a twinge, but most of the time, what fun for everyone. Not only for your own son and daughter, but for yourself when you felt like a quick jaunt to a foreign land, a quick change of scenery. Well, here it was. And here were the lions now. A quick change of scenery. Well, so real, so feverishly and startlingly real that you could feel the prickling fur on your hand, and your mouth was stuffed with dusty upholstery smell of their heated pelts, and the yellow of them was in your eyes like the yellow of an exquisite French tapestry. The yellows of the lions and the summer grass and the sounds of the matted lion lungs exhaling on the silent noontide, and the smell of meat from the panting, dripping mouths. The lions stood looking at George and Lydia Hadley with terrible green-yellow eyes. "Watch out!" she screamed Lydia. The lions came running at them. Lydia bolted and ran. Instinctively, George sprang after her, outside in the hallway with the door slammed. He was laughing, and she was crying, and they both stood appalled at each other's reactions. "George!" "Lydia, oh my dear, poor Lydia. They almost got us." "Walls, Lydia, remember, crystal walls. That's all they are. Oh, they look real, I must admit. Africa in the parlor. But it's all dimensional, super reactionary, super sensitive color film and mental tape film behind glass screens. It's all orderophonics and sonics, Lydia. Here's my handkerchief." "I'm afraid." She came to him and put her body against him and cried steadily, "Did you see? Did you feel? It's too real." "Now, Lydia, you've got to tell Wendy and Peter not to read any more of Africa." Of course, he patted her. "Promise?" "Sure." and lock the nursery for a few days until I get my nerves settled. You know how difficult Peter is about that? When I punished him a month ago by locking the nursery for even a few hours, the tantrum he threw. And Wendy too. They live for the nursery. It's got to be locked. That's all there is to it. All right. Reluctantly, he locked the huge door. You've been working too hard. You need a rest. I don't know, she said, blowing her nose, sitting in a chair that immediately began to rock and comfort her. Maybe I don't have enough to do. Maybe I have too much time to think. Well, why don't we shut the whole house off for a few days? Take a vacation. You mean you want to fry my eggs for me? Yes, she nodded. And damn my socks. Yes. A frantic, watery-eyed nodding. And sweep the house. Yes, oh yes. But I thought that's why we bought this house, so we wouldn't have to do anything. That's just it. I feel like I don't belong here. The house is wife and mother now and nursemaid. Can I compete with an African Veld? Can I give bath and scrub the children as efficiently or quickly as the automatic scrub bath can? I cannot. It isn't just me, it's you. You've been awfully nervous lately. I suppose I have been smoking too much. You look as if you didn't know what to do with yourself in this house either. You smoke a little more every morning and drink a little more every afternoon and need a little more sedative every night. You're beginning to feel unnecessary too. Am I? He paused to try to feel into himself to see what was really there. Oh, George, she looked beyond him at the nursery door. Those lions can't get out of there, can they? He looked at the door and saw it tremble as if something had jumped against it from the other side. Of course not, he said. At dinner, they ate alone, for Wendy and Peter were at a special plastic carnival across town and had telephoned home to say they'd be late to go ahead eating. So George Hadley, bemused, sat watching the dining room table produce warm dishes of food from its mechanical interior. We forgot the ketchup, he said. Sorry, said a small voice within the table, and ketchup appeared. As for the nursery, thought George Hadley, it wouldn't hurt for the children to be locked out of it for a while. Too much of anything isn't good for anyone. And it was clearly indicated that the children had been spending a little too much time on Africa. That sun, he could feel it on his neck, still like a hot paw. And the lions, and the smell of blood. Remarkable how the nursery caught the telepathic emanations of the children's minds and created life to fill their every desire. The children thought lions, and there were lions. The children thought zebras, and there were zebras. Sun, and sun. Giraffes, giraffes. Death, and death. That last. He chewed tastelessly on the meat that the table had cut for him. Death thoughts. They were awfully young, Wendy and Peter, for death thoughts. Or, no, you were never too young, really. Long before you knew what death was, you were wishing it on someone else. When you were 2 years old, you were shooting people with cap pistols. But this, the long, hot African veldt, the awful death in the jaws of a lion, and repeated again and again. Where are you going? He didn't answer Lydia. Preoccupied, he let the light glow softly on ahead of him, extinguish behind him as he headed to the nursery. He listened to it again. Far away, a lion roared. He unlocked the door and opened it. Just before he stepped inside, he heard a faraway scream and then another roar from the lions, which subsided quickly. He stepped into Africa. How many times in the last year had he opened this door and found Wonderland, Alice, the Mock Turtle, or Aladdin and his magical lamp, or Jack, Pumpkinhead and Oz, or Dr. Dolittle, or the cow jumping over a very real appearing moon. All delightful contraptions of a make-believe world. How often had he seen Pegasus flying in the sky, or fountains of red fireworks, or heard angels voices singing. But now, his yellow hot Africa, this bake oven with murder in the heat. Perhaps Lydia was right. Perhaps they needed a little vacation from the fantasy, which was growing a bit too real for 10-year-old children. It was all right to exercise one's mind with gymnastic fantasies, but when the lively child mind settled on one pattern, it seemed that at a distance, for the last month, he had heard lions roaring and smelled their strong odor seeping as far away as his sturdy door. But being busy, he had paid no attention. George Hadley still stood on the African grassland alone. The lions looked up from their feeding, watching him. The only flaw to the illusion was the open door, which he could see his wife, far down the dark hall, like a framed picture, eating her dinner abstractedly. "Go away," he said to the lions. They did not go. He knew the principle of the room exactly. You sent out your thoughts. Whatever your thoughts were would appear. "Let's have Aladdin and his lamp," he snapped. The Veltland remained. The lions remained. "Come on, room, I demand Aladdin," he said. Nothing happened. The lions mumbled in their baked pelts. "Aladdin!" He went back to dinner. "The full room's out of order," he said. It didn't respond. Or what? "Or it can't respond," said Lydia, "because the children have thought about Africa and the lions and killing for so many days that the room's in a rut." Could be. Or Peter set it to remain that way. Set it. He may have gotten into the machinery and fixed it. Peter doesn't know machinery. He's a wise one for 10, that IQ of his. Nevertheless. "Hello, Mom. Hello, Dad." The Hadleys turned. Wendy and Peter were coming in the front door, cheeks like peppermint candy, eyes like bright blue agate marbles, a smell of ozone on their jumpers from their trip in the helicopter. "You're just in time for supper," said both parents. "We're full of strawberry ice cream and hot dogs," said the children, holding hands. "But we'll sit and watch." "Yes, come tell us about the nursery," said George Hadley. The brother and sister blinked at him, and then at each other. "Nursery?" "All about Africa and everything," said the father with false joviality. "I don't understand," said Peter. "Your mother and I were just traveling through Africa with a rod and reel, Tom Swift and his electric lion," said George Hadley. "There's no Africa in the nursery," said Peter. Oh, come now, Peter, we know better." "I don't remember any Africa," Peter said to Wendy. "Do you?" "No." "Run, see, come and tell." She obeyed. "Wendy, come back here," said George Hadley, but she was gone. The house lights followed her like a flock of fireflies. Too late, he realized he had forgotten to lock the nursery door after his last inspection. "Wendy'll look and come tell us," said Peter. "She doesn't have to tell us. We've seen it." "I'm sure you're mistaken, Father. I'm not, Peter. Come along now." But Wendy was back. "It's not Africa," she said. "Well, we'll see about that," said George Hadley, and they all walked down the hallway together and opened the nursery door. there was a green, lovely forest, a lovely river, a purple mountain, high voices singing, and Rima, lovely and mysterious, lurking in the trees with colorful flights of butterflies like animated bouquets, lingering in her long hair. The African veldt land was gone. The lions were gone. Only Rima was here now, singing a song so beautiful it brought tears to your eyes. George Hadley looked at the changed scene. "Go to bed," he said to the children. They opened their mouths. "You heard me," he said. They went off to the air closet, where a wind sucked them like brown leaves up the flue to their slumber rooms. George Hadley walked through the singing glade and picked up something that lay in the corner near where the lions had been. He walked slowly back to his wife. "What is that?" she asked. "An old wallet of mine," he said. He showed it to her. The smell of hot grass was on it, and the smell of a lion. There were drops of saliva on it. It had been chewed, and there were blood smears on both sides. He closed the nursery door and locked it tight. In the middle of the night, he was still awake, and he knew his wife was awake. "Do you think Wendy changed it?" she said at last in the dark room. "Of course. Made it from a veldt into a forest and put Rima in it there instead of the lions?" "Yes." "Why?" "I don't know. It's staying locked until I find out." "How did your wallet get there?" "I don't know anything," he said, "except that I'm beginning to be sorry we bought that room for the children. If children are neurotic at all, a room like that, it's supposed to help them work off their neuroses in a healthy way. I'm starting to wonder." He stared at the ceiling. "We've given the children everything they've ever wanted. This is our reward. Secrecy, disobedience." Who was it that said children are like carpets? They should be stepped on occasionally. We've never lifted a hand. They're insufferable, let's admit it. They come and go as they like. They treat us as if we were offspring. They're spoiled and we're spoiled. They've been acting funny ever since you forbade them to take the rocket to New York a few months ago. They're not old enough to do that alone, I explained. Nevertheless, I've noticed they've been decidedly cool towards us since. I think I'll have David McLean come tomorrow morning to have a look at Africa. But it's not Africa now, it's Green Mansion's country in Rima. I have a feeling it will be Africa again before then. A moment later, they heard screams. 2 screams. 2 people screaming from downstairs. And then a roar of lions. "Wendy and Peter aren't in their rooms," said his wife. He lay in his bed with his heart beating. "No," he said, "they've broken into the nursery. Those screams, they sound familiar." "Do they?" "Yes, awfully." And although their beds tried very hard to comfort the adults to sleep for another hour, a smell of cats was in the night air. "Father," said Peter. "Yes?" Peter looked at his shoes. He never looked at his father anymore, nor at his mother. "You aren't going to lock the nursery for good, are you?" "That all depends." "On what?" Peter snapped. "On you and your sister. If you intersperse this Africa with a little variety, Sweden perhaps, or Denmark or China. I thought we were to play as free as we wished." "You are, within reasonable bounds." "What's wrong with Africa, Father?" "Oh, so now you admit that you've been conjuring up Africa, do you?" "I wouldn't want the nursery to be locked up." Matter of fact, we're thinking of turning the whole house off for a month. Live sort of a carefree, one-for-all existence. That sounds dreadful. I would have to tie my own shoes instead of letting the shoe tire do it, and brush my teeth and comb my hair and give myself a bath. It would be fun for a change, don't you think? No, it would be horrid. I didn't like it when you took the picture painter last month. That's because I wanted you to learn to paint all by yourself, son. I don't want to do anything but look and listen and smell. What else is there to do? All right, go play in Africa. Will you shut off the house sometime soon? We're considering it. I don't think you'd better consider it anymore, Father. I won't have any threats from my son. Very well. And Peter strolled off to the nursery. Am I on time? Said Mr. McLean. Breakfast, said George Hadley. Thanks. Had some. What's the trouble? David, you're a psychologist. I should hope so. Well then, have a look at our nursery. You saw it a year ago when you dropped by. Did you notice anything particular about it then? Can't say I did. The usual violences, a tendency toward a slight paranoia here and there, usual in children because they fear persecution by parents constantly, but oh, really nothing. They walked down the hall. I locked the nursery up, explained the father, and the children broke back into it during the night. I let them stay so they could form their patterns for you to see. There was a terrible screaming from the nursery. There it is, said George Hadley. You see, what do you make of it? They walked in on the children without rapping. The screams faded. The lions were feeding. Run outside a moment, children, said George Hadley. No, don't change the mental combination. Leave the walls as they are. Get! With the children gone, the two men stood studying the lions, clustered at a distance, eating with great relish whatever it was they had caught. I wish I had known what it was, said George Hadley. Sometimes I can almost see. Do you think if I brought high-powered binoculars here and I... David McLean laughed dryly. Hardly. He turned to study all four walls. How long has this been going on? A little over a month. It certainly doesn't feel good. I want facts, not feelings. My dear George, a psychologist never saw fact in his life. He only hears about feelings and vague things. This doesn't feel good, I tell you. Trust my hunches and my instincts. I have a nose for something bad. This is very bad. My advice to you is to have the whole damned room torn down and your children brought to me every day during the next year for treatment. Is it that bad? I'm afraid so. One of the original uses of these nurseries was so that we could study the patterns left on the walls by the children's minds, study at our leisure, and help the children. In this case, however, the room has become a channel toward destructive thoughts instead of a release away from them. Didn't you sense this before? I sensed only that you badly spoiled your children more than most. And now you're letting them down in some way. What way? I wouldn't let them go to New York. What else? I've taken a few machines from the house and threatened them a month ago with closing up the nursery unless they did their homework. I did close it for a few days to show that I meant business. Ah, ha! Does that mean anything? Everything. Where before they had Santa Claus, now they have a Scrooge. Children prefer Santas. You've let this room and this house replace you and your wife and your children's affections. This room is their mother and father, far more important in their lives than their real parents. And now you come along and want to shut it off. No wonder there's hatred there. You can feel it coming out of the sky. Feel that sun. George, you you'll have to change your life. Like too many others, you've built it around creature comforts. Why, you'd starve tomorrow if something went wrong in your kitchen. You wouldn't know how to tap an egg. Nevertheless, turn everything off. Start new. It'll take time. But we'll make good children out of bad in a year. Wait and see. But won't the shock be too much for the children, shutting the room up abruptly for good? I don't want them going any deeper into this. That's all. The lions were finished with their red feast. The lions were standing on the edge of the clearing, watching the two men. Now I'm feeling persecuted, said Mr. McLean. Let's get out of here. I have never cared for these damned rooms. Make me nervous. The lions look real, don't they? Said George Hadley. I don't suppose there's any way. What? That they could be real. Not that I know. Some flaw in the machinery, a tampering or something. No. They went to the door. I don't imagine a room like this will be turning off, said the father. Nothing ever likes to die. Even a room. I wonder if it hates me for wanting to shut it off. Paranoia is thick around here today, said Mr. McLean. You can follow it like a spore. Hello. He bent and picked up a bloody scarf. This yours? No, George Hadley's face rigid. It belongs to Lydia. They went to the fuse box together and threw the switch that killed the nursery. The two children were in hysterics. They screamed and pranced and threw things. They yelled and sobbed and swore and jumped at the furniture. You can't do that to the nursery. You can't! Now, children. The children flung themselves onto a couch, weeping. George, said Lydia, turn off the nursery just for a few moments so that they turn on the nursery for just a few moments so it can't be so abrupt. No. You can't be so cruel. Lydia, it's off, and it stays off, and the whole damn house dies as of here and now. The more I see of this mess we've put ourselves in, the more it sickens me. We've been contemplating our mechanical, electronic navels for too long. My God, how we need a breath of honest air. And he marched about the house, turning off the voice clocks, the stoves, the heaters, the shoe shiners, the shoelacers, the body scrubbers and swabbers and massagers, and every other machine he could put his hand onto. The house was full of dead bodies, it seemed. It felt like a mechanical cemetery. So silent. None of the humming, hidden energy of machines waiting to function at the tap of a button. Don't let them do it, Peter wailed at the ceiling as if he was talking to the house, the nursery. Don't let Father kill everything! He turned to his father. Oh, I hate you! Insults won't get you anywhere. I wish you were dead! We were, for a long time. Now we're going to really start living. Instead of being handed and massaged, we're going to start to live. Wendy was still crying, and Peter joined her again. Just a moment, just another moment of the nursery, they wailed. Oh, George, said his wife, it can't hurt. All right. If they'll just shut up. 1 minute, mind you, and then off forever. Daddy, 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 sang the children, smiling with wet faces. Now we're going on a vacation. David McLean is coming back in a half an hour to help us move out and get to the airport. We're going to go get dressed. You turn the nursery on for a moment, Lydia. Just a minute, mind you. And the three of them went babbling off while he let himself be vacuumed upstairs through the airflow and set about dressing himself. A minute later, Lydia appeared. I'll be glad when we get away, she sighed. Did you leave them in the nursery? I wanted to dress too. Oh, that horrid Africa. What can they see in it? Well, in 5 minutes, we'll be on our way to Iowa. Lord, how did we ever get in this house? What prompted us to buy such a nightmare? Pride, money, foolishness. I think we'd better get downstairs before those kids get engrossed with those damned beasts again. Just then, they heard the children calling, "Daddy, Mommy, come quick, quick!" They went upstairs and the air flew and ran down the hall. The children were nowhere in sight. Wendy, Peter! They ran into the nursery. The veldt land was empty, save for the lions, waiting, looking at them. Peter, Wendy! The door slammed. Wendy, Peter! George Hadley and his wife whirled and ran back to the door. "Open the door!" George Hadley cried, turning the knob. "Why, they've locked it from the outside! Peter!" He beat on the door. "Open up!" He heard Peter's voice outside against the door. "Don't let them switch off the nursery and the house," he said. He was saying. Mr. and Mrs. George Hadley beat the door. "Now don't be ridiculous, children. It's time to go. Mr. McLean will be here in a minute and then they heard the sounds. The lions on all 3 sides of them. And the yellow veldt grass padding through the dry straw, rumbling, roaring in their throats. The lions. Mr. Hadley looked at his wife and turned and looked back at the beast, edging slowly forward, crouching, tail stiff. Mr. and Mrs. Hadley screamed, and suddenly they realized why those screams had sounded so familiar. "Well, here I am," said Mr. McLean in the nursery door. "Oh, hello." He stared at the 2 children, seated in the center of the open glade, eating a little picnic lunch. Beyond them was the water hole and the yellow veldt land. Above was the hot sun. He began to perspire. "Where are your father and mother?" The children looked up and smiled. "Oh, they'll be here directly." "Good. We must get going." At a distance, Mr. McLean saw the lions fighting and clawing and then quieting down to feed in silence under the shade trees. He squinted at the lions with his hand tipped to his eyes. Now the lions were done feeding. They moved to the water hole to drink. A shade flickered over Mr. McLean's hot face. Many shadows flickered. The vultures were dropping down the blazing sky. "A cup of tea?" asked Wendy in the silence. Well, I was unfamiliar with the veldt before Robin. She had a selection of different stories that she was kind of suggesting based on, content and time frame and popularity. And so when she was just giving me the description, I knew Ray Bradbury. And I said, well, kind of tell me about the story. And she told me, and I'm like, ooh, that's really creepy. So, I thought, well, and the story that Jay read was too dark for me. So I said, the veldt's dark, but it's not so direct. Whereas some of the other stories were kind of cuts to the chase, and I just thought, well, this is more up my alley. It has a little suspense to it. So, and then the cremation of Sam McGee, because we had been talking about this for months, and that was the first thing that came into my mind because I had done it in high school. It was my one of my speech coach's favorite pieces, and so shout out to Bill Frito. So I said, it's been almost 20 years. It might be just time to revisit this, and I kind of started thinking about it, and I remembered a lot of it, and I went through my old stuff, and I had my scripts from high school, and I said, oh, that's the sign, I'm just doing it. So that's kind of how those came about. Reading aloud's everything. Like, so, you know, I did speech in high school, and I started in community theater in Sway City when I was a kid. So, you know, I did Beauty and the Beast and Alice in Wonderland, and, you know, that's kind of where I made most of my lifelong friends, was theater stuff when I was a kid. And so it had been 10 years since I had done any theater stuff. I did some in college. I was a theater major for a time in college, and, you know, it's kind of maybe my first love. And I kind of went away from it and did some other things. And then I was writing at the paper here in town, and I had kind of reached out and just said, you know, I'd be interested in doing some stuff just to meet some people. I mean, I knew people through work, but I just didn't have that really close friend relationships here in town yet. And I reached out to a friend who I knew was involved, and he said, oh, I think they're still looking for someone, but auditions are passed. And so he passed my name along, and Kella, who was another one of the presenters, showed up at my office the next day, and the rest is history. So, but you know, reading aloud is when you're kind of doing those kinds of things, you know, acting or dramatic interpretations, you have something in your head, and then you read it aloud, and you discover something completely different. You know, it's not until you read it aloud that the pauses come in, that the true atmosphere of the story. And, you know, maybe if you've heard the story before you read it aloud, that's kind of how you bridge that gap and make it your own. Most of my writing experience is nonfiction. I did study Japanese language, so I do have a background in language. I've written stories, fiction, since high school, and it's always kind of been maybe in the back of my mind. It's something I wanted to do, and I've always written poetry, and I've always been a big fan of those things, and but just maybe never thought it was realistic or something along those lines. So, but you know, I have, you know, notebooks of stuff that I've written over the years, and you know, some of it is okay, and some of it's like, well, and you know, and some of it I'll read back and I'll be like, you know, I just submitted some poetry to a competition, and it, you know, had been 10 years since I originally started working on it. And I didn't work on it straight for 10 years, but I looked at it and I was like, oh, now it finally is right. So yeah, I mean, I would consider myself in the creative writing field something of a novice, maybe aspiring at this point. You know, it was great to have a nice turnout tonight, and we had some great readers. I think, you know, this is our first time doing this, so I hope that, you know, anyone who sees it at home, come out next time if you want to, and the people who did come, I hope they had a good enough time that they'll think about it again. So yeah, it was great.
All right, well, next, our last reader is Jim Schooley, and he's going to be doing some of his original stories.
Good evening.
Hi.
I have mostly brief items that I have written, and there's some poetry and there's some short stories in here. So I've tried to give you a nice mix, and my work is part of a book of poetry, the name of which is Waltzing to Oblivion. I'll say a bit more later. First, I'm reading Pale Umbrage. It's very brief. Perceive the air as moving stories, while we are bound up in our mores, conceived in moonlit, sweet warm nights, preserved on days of pale gray ice, cast into the mist of winter's regret, delirious summers of denial's cool sweat, while warm embraces defer our woes, cold earth shall clutch our prescient toes. The eccentricities of sleepwalkers. 'Tis the sleepwalker's Hastened by the daylight, sanctioned on the essence of amnesia, warriors of the mind, cloaked in darkness, padding unshod, armed with a comb, pursuing the minions of evil from every tissue of the mind, an indestructible construct of pure imagination, slipping in like children among the Johns, pocket-picking the circular, leaving like whores, rescuing kittens, plucking kittens from the river, sailing the ocean, plank-walking pirates with teary regret, peacefully ennobled, saving the ever-loving planet, returning to bed, and the essence of amnesia. We don't hear enough about sleepwalkers, I think. Screaming helpless. We were mystified. There was no explanation for what we saw on that secluded road in the desert. The air had changed. We could feel it. There was no more going back. People were after us, and they were stopping at nothing. Now, as the new life of spring began to shoot out in every direction, mine was coming to an end. Soon they would pull onto the long drive and stop at the walk. Two would get out, and the third would sit in the back and wait for it all to be over. The two would come inside, one from the front and the other from the back door. I see it now as clearly as I have both times, just like I had seen the thing at the diner with my wife. The other day, while leaving the bus out on the highway, each time they took one of the three of us in the gray car, and they would come and get me next. How could we explain what each could see, what was coming? How? Now I see it again. Ever since that trip yesterday, the sound at the ravine and what? Why couldn't we remember what it was we had all seen? It had to be important. Now we were paying for it, each of us, one by one. Finding ourselves back at the car, it just seemed impossible. But the three of us all knew precisely the same things, that there was nothing any of it was important. And now we each had to wait to be taken. No resistance, just wait to go with the two tall guys with the frosted glasses. It was all too impossible to explain, and none had believed. They weren't buying it, not the cops, not her folks, not even the bus driver. He was nice enough. After walking to the bus stop, he had made an exception, and though my card wouldn't work, we had not enough cash. He made up the rest and said, "Send it to me when you can." But he never did anything, just ignored the whole story. Patronizing. There had to be an explanation for it all. Why the car radio didn't work, why the phone had fried like a potato. Under the hood, all the wires were black and charred. Now at the house, I called her folks, but I could not explain any of it. They must have sent the cops, but even he wasn't doing anything. Just stared like he was unable to comprehend a word. I never had been so unable to describe anything, especially the taking of Anna. He didn't believe that for 1 second. The look on his face, the questions he asked, he'd look into it. Yeah, come on, I know. I'm the one he's looking into. All those questions about Sheila. Hadn't she called them previously? Going through her stuff like that. It appears she didn't take her purse. No kidding. That's abduction for you. He probably intends to come back with a cadaver dog and start digging up the backyard. Now it's happening again. The gray car coming down the drive, it stops in front. The two tall guys get out. One goes to the front, one to the back. The one with the silver hair stands quietly inside the front door, his hands outstretched. The other stops behind you. Slowly you turn, you walk with them, unresisting toward the gray car. I get in, the car pulls around slowly, they drive off. I'm sitting calmly in the back seat, but inside I'm screaming, helpless, like a madman. Blackbirds of autumn. Autumn's crows have fallen out, solemnly resting on branches barren, silhouetted in the blushing dawn, warming their damp feathers, brooding, chanting their awkward song. In funeral attire they gawk and mourn. The end of summer's sweet berries, big fat bugs, bombing windshields, pranking the squirrels. Backs to the wind they sit and brood, reminiscing on gentle showers, stealing cookies from drowsy babies, scintillating flowers. Dark sentinels though they be, no admiration do they seek, they only party with their clique, sharing a joke now and then that always ends in loud guffaws. This one I wrote while sitting out at the Clay County Fair at the Art Barn that I like to do Sunday mornings. It's nice and quiet, and I just came up with a title and I wrote a poem to fit it. I am well writer. I am well writer. Many buckets have I known. They press my feet into my toes. The windlass whirls, the rope in hand scratches at my cheek and nose. Eerie echoes fill my head when down the rocky shaft I plunge, bursting far below the tiny sky recedes. As black cascades and icy numb, the bubbles churn against my ears like drums. I am well writer. None can know my obsession. Many times I've dropped down to see and feel my cold fixation, to sink into the deep below where life is in cessation. But that is where I find the eyes, long forgotten faces, how they hold you, want to tell you of their stories, why they left our world, each denied their place. I am well writer. Soon I must return, but here I have found solace. Here my ache and pain does churn. Her face and hair has bound me, my empty lungs now burn. Yet only here I see her, her story sad and tragic. Cast she was in shame, taken by a lover's anger. Her only sin was loving a man who would not father. Nobody home. Anthony, I hope you get this. In case you don't, I left a note explaining everything. Oh, that was dumb. I'm not sure how to tell you. I guess I just have to come right out and say it. I went into the centrifuge tonight, and I thought I would go blind from the bright light, but I'm all right. I mean, it really works. You are truly a genius. And the control is malfunctioning, so I need you to please override everything from there. Well, sorry, but I knew you would talk me out of it. But I'm fine. No side effects. Man, all your theories were right. So, I am talking to you from 100 years ago. Since I am able to hear the voicemail message on my cell, I think your concept of time parallels was right. If you hear me, pick up or call me back. So exciting. Click. Anthony, okay, it's 2 a.m. Call as soon as you hear this. I know you will because I called my voicemail and I changed the message and then called back. God, it's cool. Call it and listen. It's like I'm talking to myself in the future. I really want to thank you for giving me this great chance to work in your lab. Don't think I just wanted to take the glory or something. That's all yours. You just consider me your little human guinea pig, and well, thanks. I got some great pictures on my phone and sent them to my blog. I was looking at them just a bit ago on my cell. Everything is so astonishing. Did you know the courthouse had his and hers outhouses? Jeez, they did use Sears in there. I wonder if I shouldn't have left a loaf from the future. Well, call, click. Anthony, hey, it's getting light and I think people will be getting up soon. I really don't want to make contact with, just in case. Isn't that right? Call me as soon as you get to the lab and reverse the dynamo. I wonder if I can bring anything back without messing up the time continuum. Just a letter from the trash or something. Hey, call. It's so incredible. I want to talk to someone and see what they're like. Bye. Click. Anthony at 6 a.m. I just called the New York Times. Crazy, Just so I could hear them pick up. Well, it just rang. So I guess they must not man that line. Right. So it's light here now. There isn't any movement yet. Very, very lovely and quiet. Well, we'll have to go all over that. I have like 100 pictures on my phone. Call. Call soon. Click. Okay, Anthony, this is so weird. Everything is like a museum. I can't find anyone anywhere. What's strange is that there had to be people here not long ago. Lamps are burning in the homes. It's like they all went somewhere. Well, I probably shouldn't have entered people's homes here. I don't think, man, it's too crazy. I didn't think it will hurt in case anything goes wrong. Well, if you can't bring me back, that's so lame to hear me say. Just don't come here. I can't exactly say why because we didn't figure on this. Well, I sort of think there isn't anyone here. I looked all over. There's nobody. It's uninhabited. I mean, it's like, it makes sense when you think about it, right? Click. Anthony, I called everyone. I can't get a pickup. Anthony, I think I screwed up. Battery low. Battery strength critical. Place phone in charging cradle. Battery low. This, if you go to my blog, I have pictures for a lot of my stories, and I do probably as much work on the pictures as I do on the writing, and it's kind of fun to find things that are in the public domain or things that you can create or people have allowed us to use because they're wanting publicity. This one was really nice. I liked it a lot. It's a really pretty picture of these beautiful hands with flowers and a black ring. So, Nocturne Eternal. Lay darkly, silently. Ponder not the jagged edge. Turn softly those thoughts against the way that haunts. Untangle those long, bleak nights of amaranthian knot. Be not sedate of vigilance in thy presence, in thy pensive thoughts. Embrace the howling wind, it covers the cries. Seek not light to dash out the dark, for there no shadows drown. Fear not the creatures of the night, become the eyes of the mouse, divine the ears of the bat, assume the valor of the owl. Embrace the night, caress the earth, seek not in fear, but lay forever entwined with sweet nocturne eternal. Thank you. I picked 15 minutes worth of material, and I kind of got lucky. I whittled it down, and I read through it, and it was right about 15 minutes. I thought, that's cool. But yeah, when you have, I don't know, I probably have about 120 things online. So then, these are the things that I have developed, and they vary a lot. And I enjoy writing spooky stuff. It's just kind of fun, if it works. Otherwise, it's kind of nasty. But if you get a good story out of trying to scare people, then it's even more fun. It's more fun than just trying to be humorous. So I was able to go through and pick out a few that I thought would be appropriate for here and this audience. And, I thought I didn't cross over the line too badly. I've been a storyteller all my life. I began with theater in high school and just kind of got consumed by that. I got to Omaha and became heavily involved with theater and was a theater major, worked in all the theaters around Omaha. So, theater does something for you. It contains a kind of energy that is very consuming. And when you're comfortable on stage, it's something that it's kind of excitement that you don't get anywhere else. And it's a sharing. You have a talent, you really want to share it. So if you're any good on stage, then you really should be up there now and then and show people something that they didn't expect. Because it's live and it's exciting. It's theater is probably the best art form around because it uses all of them. The visual, there's dance, there's light. You've got the scenery, you've got the literature that's involved in creating the stories. So then you add to that acting. You can reach a lot of people that way, and people are going to be able to enjoy something that they might find boring to their eyes. So they're going to get a lot more out of it when somebody is presenting it, and hopefully the presenter is the right person for the material, and everybody's going to grow by that. A storyteller is somebody that's as basic as dirt. That's how we all got this thing going called the human race. It's like, you should have seen the one that got away, and off to there you are. It's just now we have something to talk about. I think people should just get out a notebook and just do it. People should journal, write about what you're doing, and if you get something really interesting happening in there, then pursue that. It doesn't have to rhyme, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe you come back later and improve on it, and people should be writing more. Definitely should, because it's always neat to, have something that you can hand somebody or leave behind that you have written about your life and things that, you think are interesting. So, well, the blog it's a collection of my work where you can, go online and you can read quite a bit of what I've written. My novel is not there, obviously, and some of my longer stuff, things that I'm submitting. But as far as the repurposed mail, it's on blogspot.com. Go to Blogspot and look for the repurposed mail, and that should be me. I think I'm the only one.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you SMU for taping this and for sending it out to all those who couldn't show up tonight. Thank you to our readers. We've got Jim Schooley here, and Colin Van Westen, and Jay Oldenkamp, and Kella Klinker. So eat the food, you can talk and mingle and whatever you want, but have a safe trip home. Thank you.